behind the golden screens of the Forbidden City, beneath silks embroidered with dragons and phoenixes, a silent war was fought, one without armies, without banners, without mercy. Tens of thousands of women entered the imperial palace believing they had been chosen by heaven. Most would never leave. Some would vanish without record. Others would be ordered to die for crimes they did not commit. What happened to China's imperial concubines was not simply scandal. It was system. And much of it was deliberately erased. To understand the fate of these women, we must first understand the structure that confined them. For over 2 millennia, Chinese emperors ruled not only a vast empire, but also a vast domestic court. From the Han Dynasty to the Qing, the Imperial Harem, known as the Hogong, was an institution as regulated as any ministry of state. In theory, the system was orderly. One empress stood at the top. Below her were ranked consorts, concubines, and attendants, each with titles, stipends, and prescribed rituals. In practice, the harem was a political ecosystem where favor determined survival. Young women, often selected through regional tribute systems or court recommendations, were brought to the palace as teenagers. Many never saw their families again. Their identities dissolved into titles. Their worth depended on a single factor: proximity to the emperor. But proximity to power is never neutral. It distorts, isolates, and weaponizes. The palace was sealed from the outside world, guarded by eunuchs, monitored by ritual. Every conversation could be reported. Every pregnancy could alter the line of succession. Every miscarriage could be fatal, politically or literally. And when the emperor died, the system's true brutality often revealed itself. In China's earliest imperial periods, particularly during the Shang and early Zhou dynasties, human sacrifice was not metaphorical. It was policy. Archaeological excavations have uncovered royal tombs containing not only treasures, but human remains. Wives, servants, concubines buried alive to accompany the king into the afterlife. To modern observers, it is unthinkable. To ancient rulers, it was continuity. The emperor's authority did not end with death, it extended beyond it. His household was expected to follow. By the time of the Qin and Han dynasties, this practice began to fade, replaced by symbolic terracotta figures or wooden effigies. Official histories often frame this as moral progress. Yet they rarely dwell on the women who had no such reprieve before reform took hold. The erasure began early. Records minimized the numbers. Language softened the violence. Sacrifice became accompaniment. Execution became following in loyalty. The dead were reframed as willing participants in imperial eternity. But even when ritual sacrifice declined, control did not. During the Tang, Song, Ming, and Qing dynasties, the imperial harem reached staggering scale. The Ming emperor reportedly maintained thousands of women in his inner court. The Qing court preserved elaborate hierarchies of 8 or more ranks. Yet for all its grandeur, life in the harem was defined by monotony and fear. Most concubines would never see the emperor more than once, if at all. Selection for an imperial audience was rare. Months, even years, could pass in isolation. A woman's fate depended on a single night that might never come. And if it did come, it might destroy her. Pregnancy elevated a concubine instantly. Bearing a son could secure influence not only for herself, but for her entire clan. But a son also threatened other factions: the empress, rival consorts, court officials invested in different heirs. The harem was not merely romantic intrigue. It was succession politics under surveillance. History remembers powerful empresses and infamous consorts. Wu Zetian, Empress Lu, consort Yang. But for every woman who ascended, thousands disappeared. When emperors suspected infidelity, conspiracy, or sorcery, entire groups of concubines could be purged. Accusations required little evidence. A rumor could mean strangulation, poison, forced suicide. Official records often reduced these events to a single line: she was ordered to die. No testimony survives, no defense. And sometimes the order was not punishment, but policy. One of the least discussed practices in Imperial China was the forced death of childless concubines after an emperor's passing. In several dynasties, particularly during periods of instability, newly enthroned rulers viewed their father's concubines as political liabilities. These women had intimate knowledge of the former emperor. Some had born sons who could become rivals. Others maintained ties to powerful families. The solution was brutal efficiency. Upon the emperor's death, childless concubines were often compelled to commit suicide by hanging or poison, so they could accompany him in spirit and eliminate potential threats. During the Ming Dynasty, this practice became chillingly formalized. Historical accounts indicate that dozens of women were executed following an emperor's funeral. The justification was ritual loyalty. The reality was consolidation of power. Later Qing emperors gradually abandoned the practice, allowing many concubines to live out their lives in seclusion within palace compounds. Yet even then, freedom was an illusion. They remained confined, economically dependent, politically irrelevant. Their lives became footnotes, surviving, but erased from narrative importance. Why did this system endure for centuries? Because it was not only political, it was psychological. Confucian ideology structured gender roles with rigid hierarchy. The emperor was the son of heaven. The empress embodied moral order. Concubines existed to ensure lineage continuity. Obedience was virtue. Silence was loyalty. Within this framework, suffering could be reframed as duty. A woman compelled to die after the emperor's death was praised in court chronicles as an exemplar of chastity. Moral virtue masked coercion. The language of loyalty replaced the language of force. Moreover, the palace's isolation prevented collective resistance. Concubines could not form stable alliances without risking suspicion. Eunuchs mediated communication. Surveillance was constant. Control was maintained not merely through violence, but through uncertainty. No one knew who might be favored next, or accused next. The emperor's attention, fleeting and unpredictable, became the axis around which thousands of lives revolved. Ironically, the greatest disruption to this system came when a woman mastered it. Wu Zetian, originally a concubine of Emperor Taizong and later consort to his son Gaozong, navigated the palace's brutality with strategic brilliance. She eliminated rivals, consolidated influence, and in 1690 CE declared herself emperor, the only woman in Chinese history to do so. Her rise exposed the harem's true nature. It was not merely domestic space. It was political infrastructure. If a concubine could become emperor, then the inner court was as decisive as the battlefield. Wu's reign intensified scrutiny of palace women in subsequent generations. Later dynasties became increasingly wary of powerful consorts influencing state affairs. Restrictions tightened. Surveillance deepened. The fear was not of women as individuals, but of the system's vulnerability. And so the response was greater control. By the Qing dynasty, the harem system was bureaucratically precise. Selection of concubines followed scheduled triennial drafts among Manchu families. Rankings were formalized, rituals meticulously recorded. From the outside, it appeared civilized, far removed from ancient sacrifice. Yet psychological confinement remained absolute. Concubines could not leave the palace without imperial permission. Romantic attachment outside sanctioned encounters was punishable by death. Eunuchs and palace maids who facilitated contact faced execution. Even aging concubines who had long fallen from favor remained inside the forbidden city until death. Their youth spent waiting, their middle years forgotten, their old age invisible. Court historians employed by the state rarely documented the emotional toll. Diaries were discouraged, letters censored. What survives are edicts, titles, and burial records. What does not survive are the interior lives of thousands of women, whose existence sustained imperial lineage. The phrase, erased from history, is not metaphorical exaggeration. Chinese official historiography was tightly controlled. Dynastic histories were compiled by succeeding regimes, often with political motives. Scandals were minimized to preserve imperial legitimacy. Excess cruelty could undermine the mandate of heaven narrative. Thus, systemic practices, forced suicides, mass purges, ritualized deaths, were often summarized in neutral language, followed in death, bestowed with posthumous honor, ordered to retire. The archive preserves hierarchy, not suffering. Archaeology occasionally interrupts this silence. Mass graves near imperial tombs, forensic evidence of strangulation. But even then, interpretation is cautious. Power shapes memory, and imperial power shaped the record. The consequences of this system extended beyond palace walls. First, it reinforced rigid gender hierarchies across society. The emperor's household modeled male dominance sanctified by cosmic order. If the Son of Heaven commanded, absolute obedience from hundreds of women, lesser men could justify similar authority within their own homes. Second, it entrenched political paranoia. Succession struggles often erupted into civil war. Sons raised in isolation, mothers executed. Factions hardened. The instability born inside the harem could destabilize the empire itself. Third, it created a historical imbalance. When women appear in imperial records, they are often cast as temptresses or tyrants, never as constrained actors within a coercive system. The few who gained influence are remembered. The many who endured silence are not. By the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1911, the imperial harem as an institution dissolved. The republic that followed condemned many imperial excesses. Yet cultural memory retained fragments. Romanticized dramas, court intrigue tales, sanitized narratives of devotion. The brutality became spectacle. The system became entertainment. What Chinese emperors did to their concubines was not a series of isolated atrocities. It was a structure, a system designed to consolidate power, manage succession, and control intimacy itself. It fused ritual with coercion, morality with obedience, memory with censorship. The women inside the palace were not merely companions. They were instruments of statecraft. When useful, they were elevated. When inconvenient, they were erased. And the most enduring act of control was not execution. It was narrative. Because power that can command life and death is formidable. But power that can decide what is remembered is absolute. In the gilded chambers of the Forbidden City, thousands of lives unfolded without audience, without authorship, without defense. History remembers emperors by reign titles and territorial conquests. It rarely remembers the women who disappeared to preserve those legacies. And perhaps that is the final lesson. Systems built on silence endure longest when the silence is mistaken for order. The palace walls still stand. The tombs remain sealed. The official histories rest in archives. But between their lines, there are absences. And sometimes, what was erased tells us more about power than what was written.